Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can get a hold of me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, if you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. Uploading new stuff on Patreon every day. We have the whole lawsuit down in the Virgin Islands with the J.P. Morgan Chase Epstein Trust lawsuit. We have that documentation up there we put up for free. And all the stuff you hear Monday to Friday, AM/FM radio, you go to Opperman Report Patreon, and you can hear it ad-free, commercial-free. Check out our archives. You go to Spreaker.com. Every Friday night, I do a live show 8 p.m., and we play two live shows every Friday night. And there's a chat room, and get an email notification when we put up new content. I am super excited about our show today. As a matter of fact, my guest, we've been talking about a half hour before we got around to doing the interview. It is Mr. Pierre Pete Charette, who is a former DEA officer. He's written a couple of books called One Hell of a Ride, Part 1 and Part 2. Covers his life in the DEA. From the French Connection to Operation Southern Comfort. And in One Hell of a Ride, Part 1, the investigative and undercover life of a DEA agent. Now, check him out at PeteCharetteBooks.com. And for our friends in Las Vegas, July 19th, you can meet Pete Charette in person. July 19, 2023, at the Mob Museum. They're putting out a special exhibit just for DEA, and it's going to be honoring Mr. Pete Charette there. Mr. Charette, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Listen, before we get into your books and your life as a DEA agent, tell us about yourself. Who is Pete Charette?
Well, Pete Charette has had a wild and crazy law enforcement career for 33 years. And I fell in love with law enforcement as a young child living in Canada. And when I first saw my first policeman, on a winter day coming back from school, I told my two brothers who were with me, I kept looking and traffic light was red and he was on the corner. And my brother asked me, he says, what are you looking at, Pete? And I said, that man there. And I was in awe with his uniform, the star on his chest, etc. And I told my brother, my oldest brother, I said, one of these days I'm going to be a police officer. And they laughed and all that. So that's how I got my first introduction in seeing a police officer and saying to myself, I'm going to be that person someday. And it came true. So later on, after I graduated from high school, I had a scholarship offered to me to go to the University of Florida, and we had a meeting at my house with the teacher that had the certificate for the offer of a free college education. And I told my dad, I said, let me go and into the bedroom for a few minutes and let me think about this. I was honored by the offer, and I went into my bedroom, and I always kept my junior elementary high school crossing guard belt. And I was looking at it hanging over my mirror, and I said, no, I'm following my dream. And I came back and told my dad, said, Dad, I'm enlisting in the Army, and and I want to be a military policeman, which my brother was in the Air Force. He was an Air Force police officer. And I did that, and I was in 3 years during the Vietnam War. And I was asked during my 3 years of service if I would represent the command, Army command, to be Police Officer of the Year. And I was really honored when the Provost Marshal asked me to do that. And I accepted it, and I became, and I was awarded the Military Police Officer of the Year. And that's when I got the call from the sheriff of Fort Lauderdale, who was a retired Provost Marshal. And he had, excuse me, he had called my parents. He had called my parents and said, I want to talk to your son. And next thing you know, I called him, and he said, I read the Army Times, saw your pictures, and long story short, he said, I want you to come to work for me immediately. Are you going to re-up? And I said, well, they're trying to get me to re-up. He said, no, you're coming to work for me. And I accepted, and 3 months later, I left the Army. I was hired by the Sheriff's Department, and this was in 1966. And drugs were just getting really a big thing happenings with the hippie movement, etc. And I was on the road patrol and made numerous cases on my own as a uniformed police officer. And 8 months later, I was promoted as the youngest detective in Fort Lauderdale. In the Sheriff's Department.
Pete, I got a quick question for you, because
sure.
You were saying that you're Canadian, though. Like, how did that work? Did you become an American citizen in order to become a cop and go to the military? And that was the U.S. military that you were in, right?
Yes, U.S. military. I did become a citizen at age 16.
Okay.
And my entire family, we became U.S. citizen. We had to move because of health reasons. My dad had to move to Florida. So I was a U.S. citizen, so therefore I was allowed to enlist in law enforcement and have classified access to documents, etc., because I was now an American citizen, proudly, and I'm still an American citizen.
And let me ask you a question, too. Now, you were saying that when you were making a lot of arrests as a uniformed cop, a lot of arresting. What kind of drugs were you arresting for?
Well, basically, I was not making any real drugs arrests at that time. What I was making was a lot of patrolmen, in those days, would go to work and they would put in their 8 hours and collected their paychecks, and they didn't really. And I was not that impressed. And I said to myself, these guys are just writing a paycheck, and that's not what the job's all about. And I said to myself, okay, get out the state statute. And I got out the state statute for police officers and what the violations were on the state for criminal violations, etc. And I started looking for those types of violations. And I broke up the biggest car theft ring while I was on patrol in the state of Florida, and the FBI wanted to take the case over, and the sheriff called me in, and he says, the FBI here said this is, interstate transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, Sheriff, I said, this is my case, it's not the FBI's case. And he says, gentlemen, you heard Mr. Charette, have a good day. So I made a lot of cases, and, I ended up, while I was on patrol, it was a rainy night, I'll never forget it as long as I live, and I was patrolling in front of a nightclub, and it was pouring like crazy, and I saw this man laying in the gutter, and water was rushing over him, and he had a bottle of scotch in his hand. And I got out of my car, and I walked over, and the bouncer in front of this club said, he's been laying there for an hour now, and so I walked up to him, and I said, hey, get up, and he didn't respond, so I kicked him, not really hard, but I kicked him to get his attention, and he wouldn't move, and I leaned down, and he whispered to me, get away from me now, I'm a cop. Undercover.
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
And that's when I said, you know what, you're not worth it. Good luck, guy. You're going to get run over, but it's raining too hard. I'm out of here. And I took off. And the people at the front door were laughing. And later on, when I came in off the shift, this gentleman was there, and he came over and he introduced himself. And in those days, they only had 2 narcotics agents in the Broward Sheriff's Office. And he said, I'm Sergeant so-and-so. And he said, you reacted so quickly. And he says, you have impressed me like... And he was an ex-veteran from the Korean War. And his arm, one of his arms was almost blown off and it just dangled. And we talked, and I said, you know, you've been doing undercover work. He says, yeah, and he says, and guess what? You're going to be doing undercover work too. And we kind of laughed. And next thing you know, I got called in about 2 weeks later, and I had been 8 months on the job, promoted to detective. And I was the youngest detective in the state of Florida. And they put me in the vice squad, and then transferred me over to the Narcotics Bureau with these 2 gentlemen. And that's how I started my career for the rest of my life, working undercover as a narcotics agent, making cases all over Florida, narcotics cases, LSD, heroin, cocaine, marijuana. And we made more cases than any department in the state of Florida. And then the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in those days, they had 5 agents in Miami. Now they have close to 1,000 something. And they used to use me for undercover work because they were pretty well known, because when you only have 5 agents in an office,
Sure.
Sooner or later people know who you are. So I did a lot of undercover work. And long story short on that one is that 8 years later, I was going through night school and got notified by the front office while I was in class that the Federal Bureau of Narcotics director in Miami wants you in Miami immediately. And I said, oh, they must have something big and they want to use me. So I left class, got to Miami, and he was there waiting for me. And his secretary was there. Everybody else had gone home. And he said, get me Washington on the line right now. And I said, Ben, what's going on? Sit tight and keep your mouth shut. I said, okay. And laughing. And he said to the deputy director of DEA in Washington, he said, I got him here. He'll accept the job, but he'll only accept it as a grade 9. And I'm looking at him, it's like, what's going on? And he said, okay, thank you. And he said, Frenchie, congratulations. You've just been hired, and you're going to France to work undercover on the French connection with the French police.
Incredible.
Because I spoke fluent French. I was a native Frenchman. So,
well, Pete, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a quick question, because the other night we just happened to be watching Serpico, right? So what period of time was this? What year was this when you were down in Florida?
This was in 1970.
Okay, now did you witness or experience any of that kind of corruption?
Any what now?
Any of that kind of corruption like we see in the movie Serpico?
Oh, yeah, many times. And my book covers a lot of attempted corruption of me, and I was offered hundreds of thousands of dollars when I was posing as a Canadian mobster in France, and I was taking orders and taking delivery of shipments of heroin that usually went through Canada for the U.S. mob, and I always escaped, etc. And corruption. There was a lot of temptation out there, but my father said to me when I got promoted, and finally I made it after 7 years of narcotics work in Fort Lauderdale. I made it to that my goal was to become a federal narcotics agent.
Right.
And in my mind, my goal was, you're going to get to the top of all these suppliers of heroin in France, and you're going to break the French connections with your colleagues.
Okay, then one more quick question for you, Pete, but before we get to French Connection.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you're an incredibly ambitious guy, hard worker, right? But did you have time for a family and a wife and personal life?
At that time, when I first started in Sheriff's Department, I was single. I was a bachelor. And I got married 2 years before I was hired by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics to go to France.
Gotcha.
But during that time, I made some historical cases. And as a matter of fact,
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Netflix has shown an interest that they want to do a 2-year series of all my cases that I made all around the world. So that's something that we're looking at. But my goal was I'm going to get to the top, and I'm going to put these people in prison for the rest of their life.
Okay, so you get hired to work on the French Connection case. I mean, first of all, a couple of questions. How did that case initiate? Was there an informant?
No. What happened is the French Connection started back in the 30s. And after the war, that was French Corsican mobsters who had worked for the Foreign Legion, etc., during the war, and they formed the French Connection and became manufacturer of heroin using heroin, morphine base coming out of in the Far East. And they had chemists in Marseille manufacturing heroin, and they were the best manufacturer of heroin in the world. Joe Cesare, who was considered the king of chemists, he was the only one that could fabricate 98.2% heroin. And so they started moving heroin, and they had connections with the U.S. mob out of New York and the Canadian mob. And they became the supplier for Canada and the United States, and then the heroin epidemic just exploded. And that's when President Reagan, not Reagan, but Nixon, he declared the war on drugs. And that's when I got the phone call, and they said, Washington had said, we need a fluent French speaker, a guy that has worked narcotics and speaks fluent French, not State Department French.
And then what happens when you get over to France? Like you're in contact with other agents, and they introduce you to the smugglers? How does that work?
Yeah, what happened is I got to Paris, and at that time there was only 5 agents in the Paris office, and then we had various offices in Frankfurt, in Rome, in Spain, in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, etc., in Belgium. And when I got there, those 5 agents, I became one of the agents, but my job was to work with the French police, establish a better liaison and relationship with them. And there was a lot of corruption in the French Narcotics Bureau prior to my arrival. And one of our directors had embarrassed the French government because he went publicly in France and said, we're trying to do the best to help stop the heroin from flowing into the United States. And French corrupt narcotics agents are tipping off the Corsican mob. And I have to lay it out. And next thing you know, the French government transferred them back to the United States immediately within 24 hours, caused a real disaster. And that's when I came into play. And they had new people now in the French Narcotics Bureau. And I became the liaison man and the undercover guy for the French police because they could not work undercover at all. It's a violation of the Napoleon Code of Law. And I still have good friends there, and we took off, and they used me as a Canadian mobster. I was ordering shipments. I had an undercover informant in Canada, in Montreal, who was like number 2 in the Canadian mob. And we had a twist on him, and he would vouch for me if any Corsican mobster would call and say, "Do you know Mr. Brissett?" And he would say, "Yes, he's part of my family." So that's how I used to order 20 kilos of heroin. And then they would come in and make the arrest. I would escape and chase down the street of Paris, because my first case, they arrested everybody on the Champs-Élysées, and I took off running. And the Claridge Hotel was on the Champs-Élysées, and I already figured out my escape route, and I ran through the lobby to the back street and took off running. Well, all of a sudden, I hear yelling at me, "Arrête, arrête," meaning stop, stop, police. And I said, "Oh, my God." And so I just kept running, and next thing you knew, he took 2 shots at me.
Whoa.
He hit the brick. Yeah, he hit the brick walls. And that's when I went into high gear. And I said to myself, what in the devil is going on? This guy is shooting at me. And so I ran, and then there was a little pub that some of us used to go after work, and it was right a couple blocks away, and I ran in and all that. And I'll never forget it, the owner who goes, "Oh, Pierre, how are you?" And I said, "Not now, patron." And I went into the restroom, and I could hear sirens and all that, and I stayed in the pub for at least 3 hours, and then slowly walked back to the French police office. And when I walked in, the director of police, a gentleman by the name of Francois Lemuel, he was like a father to me, just fantastic. And unfortunately, he retired and got ran over by a truck in his hometown. But I walked in, and there he is. There's my boss, the director for Europe, and there's an assistant guy from the embassy. And I'm looking at all of them, and I said, "Guys, I had a guy chasing me, and he wanted to kill me." And they, "Oh, we apologize, Pierre, we apologize. We couldn't tell any of the uniform the officers that you were an undercover plant from the States." And I said, "We're going to have to change this program around, guys. I don't mind being undercover. I've been threatened before. I've had people hold guns to my head and back in the States trying to kill me, saying, 'You're the man, you're the man.' And I talked my way out of it. But I said, when they start shooting real bullets, that concerns me. From now on, I call the shots."
Wait, now, Pete, but back then it was policy that they could shoot a fleeing suspect in the back? He's running away?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Times have changed. Times have changed. Now, I got another question for you, okay? Now, if these Corsican mobsters, right, this French Connection organization, this is a huge operation. They're making tons of money. They've probably all known each other for, their generations, right? Now, so after a while, they're going to have to pick up, hey, every time there's a bust, Pierre over here, Lucky Foot, everyone else is getting busted, and this guy's making, makes an escape. They must catch on to that after a while, right?
Well, you got to understand now. Yes, they could think that way, but there was various factions of the Corsican mob. There was the Corsican mob, the head of the Corsican mob in Marseille. That's where the labs were. Now, their soldiers were stationed in Paris, Belgium, you name it, Italy, etc. So there was it was quite an organization, very well managed, and they did not hesitate to kill anybody. So every time if I escaped out of Paris, then I would drop out of sight, and then of course there was so much going on, especially in Amsterdam, in Belgium, in Italy, guys from those offices would call, Pete, we need you in Belgium today. Pete, we need you in Sicily tomorrow, etc. So I was moving around. And
you found that it was that easy for you to infiltrate into these different operations on such a regular basis?
Believe it or not, because once they were arrested, the Corsican mobsters that were arrested, and one case specifically mentioned in my book, I mentioned all my cases there, and it was a joint effort with my agents and all that, and the French police. It was not all about me, but I did the undercover work. So when you are in France, when you arrest, and a lot of other European countries, when they're arrested, first of all, they're not allowed to make a phone call for 4 days. They're under interrogation. As a result, that means that the French would say, do you know this gentleman that you were meeting with from Canada? All we have is the guy's last name was Brissette. And I'd say no. And next thing you know, they would pop a picture in front of him and says, there you are on the Champs-Élysées drinking with him. We photographed you. That's a count against you. That's 10 years in prison for lying to us. They could not have an attorney under the Napoleon Code of Law. They couldn't ask for an attorney or make a phone call. So what would happen is by the time the 4 days were up, they were charged, first of all, to 30 to 35 years in French prison in the Bastille. And they just dropped out of sight, not allowed to make phone calls. And a lot of them would die in the Bastille. And they want, if I was contacted and said, we know that, we suspect that you were behind this. Okay. I'd say to them, if you ever come to Canada, I will kill you. How dare you insult me? And I would now take the aggressive action verbally against them, and they'd go into a panic and say, we'll go shopping somewhere else. But don't you ever call me a cop or something like that, because I will kill you, your daughters, your mother. I'll dig up your grandmother and kill her all over again, because that's the way we Canadians operate. And they would, you go into a reverse attack, and it's all, it's an act, and you got to be a great actor. And I've had friends and colleagues working undercover, good friends and colleagues, and who were killed. And sometimes they adapt the figure that they play, and they forget who they are. And that's unfortunate. That's when I teach at the academies and all that, I say, you have to have nerves of steel, read body language, so take acting classes, acting 101, because you become an actor, but don't play the role after you've done the case and try to remain with that role, because you'll have a divorce, you'll get other agents killed, because then you're not on your guards. And it is special talent, and I did it for 17 years. And I relied on...
We're talking to Pete Charette. You can find him at PeteCharetteBooks.com, and the books we're talking about are One Hell of a Ride, Part 1 and Part 2. The investigative and undercover life of a DEA agent, and Part 2 is a former French connection to Operation Southern Comfort. And remember, you can meet him in person July 19th at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. But now, Pete, there must have been incidents where you were trying to infiltrate groups and they didn't take the bait. Did that happen too?
Oh yeah. That they didn't take the bait, and with the one specific case that's mentioned in my French Connection chapter is I was negotiating for close to $20 million worth of heroin to take back to Canada, and the bad guys they asked me to meet them outside of Paris and meet them in a town called Lille, Lile, small town between Belgium and France. And I always had a bodyguard with me. And this guy built like a muscular, about 6'2", and he was my bodyguard. And so we went to Lille, and the French cops set up surveillance on these guys, well-known Corsican mobsters. The French has said, yes, they're for real, these guys, Pierre, and just be careful. So we met in the square of Lille, and the French had gotten there, and of course they established surveillance about maybe 5 hours before the meeting goes on, and they watch their movement to see who else they're meeting, etc., to see if it's not a setup or something like that. Well, while I was talking with this gentleman, he said, "Look, we want to see the money," and I said, "No, you don't see the money. I see the heroin first, because you people have a reputation not only to sell heroin, but to rip off people just for the money, because you had a case maybe that where the French cops seized the." And I said, "We do our homework. You should."
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
"Show us the merchandise. We'll pick the spot." And he said, "No. He said, I'll tell you what. You take your friend, and let him come with us, and then we'll show you the thing, and we'll show him where the stash is." And my bodyguard, who had not worked undercover that much, and he said, "I'll go, Pete." And I said, "No, you're going to stay right here." And meanwhile, I always scan with my eyes who's walking around, who's looking at us, etc. And I'm very lucky. Body language, I can read it real good. And because you have to be able to read body language to save your life. And what happened is, I happened at the corner of my eye, I saw across the street one of the French police officers hiding behind the side of the building, and he's giving me a hand across his throat, meaning cut it off. So, because we prearranged those signals, and that means something's up and you're going to get taken down. So, and this is not going to be a real one. Well, long story short on that one is, I told my bodyguard, Kevin, I said, "Okay." And his name was Giapparelli. He was an Italian Corsican mobster. And I said, "Giapparelli, let me tell you something. I don't like the tone, the way this thing is starting to turn, and you're insistent." I said, "Meet me in Paris when you're ready to show me the heroin, and then we'll give you the money." But I said, "We're out of here." Well, we left, luckily. And when we hooked up with the French cops, they had dug 2 graves, and they were going to kill us and put us in the grave and take our money, because they had lost a shipment like 30 days prior to that. And they will recuperate their loss by killing us. So it's a dangerous job, and I loved every minute of it. I'd do it all over again. But when I teach and tell people about how you got to be able to be on your toes, read body language, take a body language course. And but I was very blessed with a special talent.
Well, listen, now, Pete, so you were able to dodge that one, but were you ever ripped off in one of these deals?
No, I've never gotten ripped off. Now, we've had other agents, get ripped off. And, for me, I don't like to brag, but it came natural for me, and I loved it. But I didn't take my work at home, and so I lived basically a double life. And I went behind the Iron Curtain, made the first case ever made in a communist bloc country. I was smuggled in, got 20 kilos of heroin delivered in Belgrade by by the first, these gentlemen had established a heroin lab. This was the first lab ever discovered in a black country, and they were attempting to produce heroin because they had opium fields there for medical purposes, and the owner or director of the opium laboratory decided to start making heroin, and they were going to try to take the business away from the French Connection people. And my bosses in Washington and in Paris, when I came up with this case through a source, they said, Pete, we've heard this stories for years. They're going to take you for a ride. This guy, all he wants is a ticket back to Belgrade. And I told my boss, Nick, and the director, I said, look, guys, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I know what I'm doing, and I can tell whether they're lying to me or this smells. I said to Nick, I said, all he wants is 5,000 francs to go to Belgrade for the train trip. I've already told him I want a Western Union telegram from each train station that you stop at, and that was for me to track his trail. And my boss said, Peter, he says, he's going to take you for a ride. I said, Nick, I'll tell you what, give me the 5,000 francs. If I'm wrong, I'll pay it back to the U.S. government out of my pocket. But I said, I got the feeling this is for real. He says, you're on, Frenchie. So as a result, he went, sent me a Western Union telegram. We tracked him there. And then on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks later, he comes back to Paris. And I go and meet him. And right inside this little cafe near Notre Dame Cathedral, he drops a package right on the table. And when he dropped it, everybody in the place heard the boom. And I said, oh, my God, and I grabbed it immediately. You know, I said, are you crazy? And my bodyguard was with me, and I said, keep your eyes on him. I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I went to the bathroom, opened up the bag, and I could smell the acetic anhydride, which is one of the key elements for heroin, from morphine to heroin. And it just hit me, and I said, oh, God, this is for real. And then I took out an ampule, tested it, and that thing went blue immediately. And I said, we got it. We got proof now. And called my bosses after the meeting, and I told this guy, tell your friends I want 20 kilos. I want it within 15 days, and they can reach me at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal. I have a penthouse room up there, and to send a message to the front desk, and that, our anniversary will be celebrated on the 20th of such and such a date. That was the code. And next thing you know, my bosses went crazy. Washington went crazy. It was 86% pure heroin. And I got back to Belgrade with my bodyguard, with the secret police of the Belgrade communist faction. And they delivered, I said to my partner, he posed as my brother, I said, you're going to come back and take the delivery because I have some business in France with the people in Marseille. So I said, my brother here will be here with my bodyguard to take the delivery. And they took the delivery, and I just left. And sure enough, they delivered 20 kilos, and it was the first heroin ever uncovered in a black country. So undercover work was my specialty, and I, without my guys backing me up, I always refer to it as a team effort. But my stories in both books are true, not enhanced by any means. The exact stories, because I have copies of every report of my 26 years with DEA ever written on every case I made worldwide.
Yeah, once again, the books are called One Hell of a Ride, The Investigative Undercover Life of a DEA Agent, and One Hell of a Ride 2, From the French Connection to Operation Southern Comfort. You can find those at PeteCharettebooks.com. So, Mr. Charette, back to the French Connection case. How realistic is the movie, the famous movie, The French Connection, compared to the case you worked on?
Well, the movie, was Eddie Egan and Sonny Grasso. There were two detectives in New York working narcotics, and they had gotten a tip, and they had seen an Italian mobster meeting with at a hotel in New York, and meeting it was a TV announcer from Paris, and also an elderly gentleman. And when they spotted these guys, they said, Egan and Grasso said, that's so-and-so. I can't remember the Italian guy's name. But anyhow, what the heck is he doing? And then they realized that these guys were staying at a hotel and they were from France, blah, blah, blah. So they stayed on the case. So the French Connection movie is only about one case.
Gotcha.
And so when they did deliver the merchandise, and they observed that there was an old man and a Frenchman, and they also had surveillance on them, and they figured that he was the boss, and he was using the TV announcer to bring in the heroin, et cetera, to a car. I think he had a Citroen Maserati that they came through with customs, and they were on a ship. Long story short is that they arrested everybody. Now, in the movie, the real scene that occurred is when Eddie Egan was chasing the subway train, because they were the French elderly man suspected something was not right, and he ran through the subway. He knew he was going to be arrested, got on a subway just in time for the doors to close, and that, if you recall on the movie, if you've seen it, he waves bye-bye to Popeye Doyle, and that's how the movie ends as far as that case was, and they seized the money, the heroin, and later on the heroin was stolen from the New York police. And
well, did you ever hear any rumors about who was behind that heroin theft of the French Connection heroin?
Oh yeah.
Okay, who do you think it was?
Well, one of the guys' name was oh my God, Festa, and they arrested him. And what they had done, they had substituted the heroin, and the heroin then was dispersed back to the mob and sold. And there was always a suspicion that Eddie Egan wasn't possibly involved with it. But they did identify the people that were also acting to seize this, and there were some corrupt cops in there. Now, Sonny Grasso was not. Sonny didn't participate in that theft, and he was. I think he's still a movie director in Hollywood. But Sonny was clean and a great guy. As far as Eddie Egan, he retired in Fort Lauderdale, drank himself to death, and it was a disaster, and there was a lot of suspicion that he partook in the theft of the French heroin.
Now, I grew up in New York, and I always heard that it was two cops from Staten Island. Later on, they lived in Staten Island, maybe not at the time, and that they owned a chain of video stores. Those are the guys, right?
They were part of the guys.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, as far as the guy that escaped, that was the real French Connection. He was the head of the French Corsican mob, and his name is Jean Géant. Géant disappeared, vanished, and DEA or BNDD, and they all tried to locate him. There was rumor he had gone to South America, blah, blah, blah. Well, when 3 years after I was in Paris, I was promoted to become the new agent in charge and open up the first office on the French Riviera for DEA. I was a one-man office, believe it or not. And I had a picture of my advisor, and it was of Jean Géant's picture. And I said to myself, I'm going to find you, before I leave here. And I looked for this guy the whole time. I was there for 2.5 years. And I guess when it was time for me to go back to the States, the new agent, I had picked him to take over my post. And I told, his name was Ed O'Brien, and I told Eddie, I said, Eddie, here's a picture of Gerard. He's here somewhere on the Riviera. Find him for me and get with the cops and apprehend him. I said, because that was my goal, to get the main man. About 4 months later, Eddie called me, says, got him. And he was arrested, found just outside of Monaco, on the Italian side in Bordighera, and he had 4 labs going in a chateau in the hills outside Bordighera, and then they had a ship, private ship there, hauling gas, oil, and he was followed and watched.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Got on this ship, and they uncovered 4 labs in the castle and also a lab inside the tanker ship. And he was still active in business, and then he died in prison.
Pete, we're running toward the end. We're running out of time.
Yep.
Okay, so I'd like to invite you to come back because we haven't touched on the Southern Comfort case at all. So hopefully I can get you to come back in the next few weeks.
I would be honored.
No, you're a great storyteller. You're an excellent storyteller. But I got a couple of quick questions for you. Well, what do you make? You hear these stories about the CIA, with Iran-Contra bringing in cocaine and stuff. Well, what do you make of that? They're bringing it in one door, and you guys are arresting people out the other door. What is going on, man?
The whole time that, as a matter of fact, Southern Comfort, that was the biggest cocaine conspiracy in the history of the United States.
Right.
That I made with my guys here. We transported $3.8 billion worth of cocaine for the U.S. mob, and they didn't even know we were undercover. The Iran-Contra being involved in cocaine, etc. I worked a lot of cocaine cases.
Okay.
I went to Colombia. I was getting cocaine from Pablo Escobar, etc. And we never heard through wire intercepts through our Colombian offices in Medellin and in Bogota about the agency being involved. And I think that's a myth, to be very honest with you.
Really?
Because if they were and did not tell us, a couple of times I intervened with members of the agency and told them, you step 1 foot outside what you're supposed to do, and I will put you in jail. And I said, I would put the President of the United States in jail. I said, I don't care what your title is.
Okay,
And,
then let me ask you this then, okay? Because like I said, we are running short on time. Just recently, in fact, it was the same week that Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, they found 20 tons of cocaine on a ship owned by J.P. Morgan Chase, right? Now, what's going on when you got a shipment? That's not organized crime, right? Who's doing that?
That means you got a crooked J.P. Morgan guy that's associated with the mob.
Yeah.
That would be my deduction, and if you dig hard enough, it'll be uncovered because no private like J.P. Morgan or owners of stock market, etc., would take that kind of chance unless he's working with the mob. And greed steps in. Trust me. A lot of politicians, unfortunately, and the greed and money talks. And I arrested the chairman of the Democratic Party in Columbia, South Carolina, and arrested 6 sheriff and politicians, and they had contracts on my life to kill me, etc. And President Reagan intervened on that with me and asked me to go somewhere and straighten out an office. But politicians are involved with some of these guys. And as far as I was concerned, people always ask me, well, you arrested this guy. You advised the U.S. attorney of his rights. He died 3 weeks later. I said, look, title doesn't mean anything to me. Is that if you're corrupt, don't be in the same place that Pete Charette's there and with his guys, because he will take you down.
What about that big smuggling operation coming up from Florida called The Company with that fellow?
Oh, yeah.
I interviewed a bunch of those guys. What can you tell us about them? Grassi.
Well, the company, we broke the company. I was in South Carolina. When I got to South Carolina, corruption was livid. And I formed an informal task force with trusted state SLED agents and the sheriff's department guys, and they were assigned to my office. And lo and behold, the company had intervened and offered $5,000 to a SLED agents to be on the lookout, and they were bringing loads. This was the company bringing loads into the Darlington airport. And the SLED agent was to be the lookout to advise them if there was any DEA or SLED activity on the radio. And then they flew in planes, and we arrested the members of the company. And that's where the chairman of the Democratic Party, an attorney, Johnny Etheridge, he was part of it, had bribed the SLED agent with the money furnished from the company. Company was based out of St. Louis, one of the biggest marijuana smuggling organization at that time in the United States. And we broke the company and arrested all of our people and convicted everybody. And the U.S. attorney, I walked into his office when he had found out, and he had tried to tip Johnny Etheridge that Charette and the SLED had busted everybody. And I was working directly under the order of the U.S. Attorney General of the United States, reported only to him on that case. And I walked into Mr. Leiden's office. He was screaming and yelling at me, and I said, Tom, before you say anything, I turned around to my agent, Chuck, and I said, Chuck, read him his rights. And he went ballistic. How dare, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm working for the Attorney General of the United States, and you're a suspect in this. You tipped off Johnny Etheridge, and he destroyed documents from his office before we arrested him. You worked behind my back. And I said, Mr. Lane, have a good day. 3 weeks later, well, I think it was 3 weeks or a month later, he died of a heart attack. And so corruption does come into play. And then I had state senators there, take out our contract to have me kill and my family and all that. And then President Reagan called and asked me if I would go and straighten out an office, and I did. Became the supervisor in that office, and that's when we made the biggest cocaine conspiracy in the history of the United States. That's part 2.
Yeah, we're going to have to get you back to talk about that. We are out of time. We've been speaking to Pete Charette, PeteCharetteBooks.com. It's Pierre Pete Charette. If you go on Amazon, you're looking for these books. And the books are called One Hell of a Ride, The Investigative Undercover Life of a DEA Agent, and One Hell of a Ride 2, From the French Connection to Operation Southern Comfort. And if you buy those books and take them down to the Mob Museum on July 19th and tell them Eddie Opperman sent you, I'm going to get him to autograph those books for you, okay? But you got to buy them first, okay? And Pete Charette, man, I'd love to have you come back and tell us more of these stories.
Thank you, Eddie, and I will be sending you signed copies of both of my book, and it was an honor.
And if anybody wants to buy those copies, you can buy them from me. Thank you so much. I would love to. I'll send you my address when I get off the air. Thank you so much, Mr. Charette.
All right. Have a good day, and God bless.
Good night.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities. Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.